Valentine's Day. The calendar's official promise of romance, warmth, connection, and perfect memories. But what happens when expectation becomes pressure, and pressure quietly mutates into panic? Tonight, you're watching Mr. Whisper's Official, where we explore the unsettling edge of real human experiences. Moments when ordinary situations twist into something deeply uncomfortable or even terrifying. Before we begin, take a moment to subscribe and join our growing circle of listeners. We'll understand that reality can sometimes be stranger and darker than fiction. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever prepared for a date so carefully that every tiny detail mattered? The outfit, the location, the conversation topics, the hope that maybe this one night could change everything? Valentine's Day magnifies those expectations. It turns a simple dinner into a performance, a meeting into a test, and sometimes, stranger into a threat you never saw coming. Tonight, we're uncovering 3 real Valentine's Day encounters where Cupid's arrow didn't just miss, shattered something far more fragile: trust, safety, and peace of mind. These are not stories about mild embarrassment or forgettable awkwardness. These are moments when romance collapsed into chaos, and smiles masked warning signs, and when a single evening spiraled far beyond anyone's control. Our first story begins quietly, like most disasters do. A normal invitation, normal restaurant, a normal hope that maybe, just maybe, this Valentine's Day would finally feel special. But perfection is fragile, and sometimes all it takes is one strange comment, one unsettling gesture, one moment where something feels just slightly off. That subtle shift, that quiet, creeping discomfort, is where tonight's journey begins. Because the scariest part of a bad date isn't always what happens at the end. It's the moment you realize you should have left much earlier, didn't. And once you notice that feeling, it's already too late. Her name wasn't important, at least, not anymore. But the memory of that Valentine's dinner never faded. She met him through mutual friends, the kind of casual introduction that feels safe simply because someone you trust approved it. He was polite, attentive, almost overly enthusiastic about planning the evening. The restaurant was elegant but quiet, filled with soft lighting and carefully arranged flowers that made every table feel like a staged photograph. At first, nothing seemed wrong, but discomfort rarely announces itself loudly. It whispers, it lingers and pauses. It hides behind smiles that last a little too long. He asked questions, normal ones at first, about work, hobbies, childhood memories. But slowly, the questions shifted. He wanted details, specific ones. Where she lived exactly, whether she locked her doors at night, how often she stayed home alone. Each question was delivered with a laugh, as if curiosity itself were harmless. She brushed it off. People are awkward on first dates, right? But then came the strange coincidences. He mentioned seeing her at places she didn't remember noticing him. A bookstore last month, a coffee shop weeks ago, a bus stop she used only once. The timeline didn't make sense, but confronting him felt dramatic. And Valentine's Day has a way of pressing politeness over instinct. The food arrived. He barely touched his. Instead, he watched her eat, not casually, but intensely. Like observation itself was his purpose for being there. When she checked her phone, he asked who she was texting. When she shifted in her seat, he leaned closer, lowering his voice to a near whisper, telling her how fate had been guiding them toward this night for longer than she realized. That word fate landed heavy, not romantic, Not comforting, just heavy. And then came the moment that froze her completely. He described her apartment building in detail, including the broken hallway light that maintenance hadn't fixed yet. She had never told him where she lived. The air changed instantly. Every polite excuse to leave felt suddenly urgent. When she stood, he smiled, calm, knowing, and simply said, "I hoped you'd figure it out eventually." She left quickly. He didn't follow. But weeks later, she would notice him again. Cross streets, inside stores, always watching, always smiling. So tell me, have you ever ignored a red flag because leaving felt rude? Because politeness felt safer than confrontation? Sometimes. What feels socially uncomfortable is actually survival trying to speak. If the first story was unsettling, the second crossed into something far more dangerous, because this time the night didn't just feel wrong. It became physically threatening. He seemed charming at first, confident, relaxed, the kind of person who made conversation feel effortless. They met through a dating app, exchanged messages for weeks, and by Valentine's Day, meeting in person felt natural. Even overdue. He suggested a scenic overlook outside the city, somewhere quiet, somewhere private, somewhere romantic. The drive was peaceful at first, music playing softly, conversation flowing. But distance changes dynamics. Streetlights disappeared, cell signal weakened, the road narrowed. Isolation crept in slowly, like fog rolling across an empty field. When they arrived, the view was breathtaking, city lights shimmering far below, but something in his demeanor shifted. He became quieter, less expressive, watching her instead of speaking to her. When she mentioned heading back soon, he didn't respond immediately. Instead, he asked a question that made no sense in context. "Do you trust me completely?" The words hung in the cold night air. Before she could answer, he locked the car doors, calmly, casually, as if it were routine. He began talking about loyalty, about how people prove connection through obedience, about how Valentine's Day was the perfect time to test emotional bonds. His tone never rose. He never shouted. That was the terrifying part, the calm certainty. She tried to stay composed, agreeing where necessary, carefully steering conversation toward returning to the city. Minutes stretched painfully long. Every movement felt calculated. Eventually, she convinced him she needed her phone charger from the trunk. When he unlocked the doors, she didn't hesitate. She ran down the gravel road into darkness, not knowing direction, only distance.
Ah,
A passing driver spotted her nearly a mile away,
I never chased her.
but police later discovered disturbing items in his vehicle. Restraints, recording equipment, detailed notes about previous dates, planned encounters, experiments, he called them. Romance, to him, was control disguised as affection. And the question remains, how well do you truly know someone before you trust them with isolation? The third story is the one survivors rarely speak about openly because its horror wasn't just physical, it was psychological, relentless, suffocating. They had been dating for months, comfortable, familiar, safe, or so she believed. Valentine's Day was meant to celebrate commitment. He planned everything: dinner at home, candles, music, handwritten notes describing their future together. At first, it felt intimate, personal, thoughtful, but the evening slowly revealed something deeply disturbing. His version of their future didn't include her choices. He presented schedules, rules, expectations for how she would behave, dress, interact with others. At first she laughed, assuming it was a strange joke. He didn't laugh back. His voice stayed soft, calm, certain. He explained that love required structure, permanence, exclusivity beyond ordinary relationships. When she tried to leave, he blocked the door, not aggressively, but firmly. He wanted discussion, negotiation, agreement. Hours passed. He alternated between pleading devotion and cold emotional pressure, insisting their bond was destined, and resistance meant betrayal. The psychological manipulation was suffocating, constant, persistent, relentless. Eventually she escaped when a neighbor knocked after hearing raised voices. Authorities later described his behavior as coercive fixation, an obsessive need to possess, not love. No physical violence occurred, yet the emotional captivity left lasting trauma. Because sometimes the most terrifying prison is the one built from affection, twisted into control. And sometimes the person you think you know best is the one you understand least. So what do these stories teach us? That danger rarely appears in obvious forms. It smiles. It plans romantic evenings. It speaks softly. It asks personal questions disguised as interest. Valentine's Day amplifies emotional vulnerability. People want connection, reassurance, meaning, and that desire can cloud instinct. But intuition is not paranoia. It is pattern recognition built from experience and survival. When something feels wrong, even slightly, that feeling deserves attention. Notice intensity that develops too quickly, curiosity that becomes surveillance, affection that becomes control, isolation disguised as romance. These are not dramatic exaggerations. They are documented behavioral patterns and unsafe encounters. Protecting yourself is not pessimism, it is awareness. Share locations with trusted friends. Meet in public spaces first. Maintain independent transportation. Most importantly, permit yourself to leave without explanation if discomfort appears. Politeness should never override safety. And now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a date that felt unsettling, strange, or frightening? Share your story in the comments. Your experience might help someone else recognize danger sooner. If tonight's stories reminded you how unpredictable human behavior can be, subscribe to Mr. Whispers Official. For more real accounts that reveal the unsettling truths hidden beneath ordinary life, because sometimes the scariest stories aren't about monsters in the dark, but people sitting across the table, smiling, waiting, and hoping you won't notice the warning signs until it's too late.